Yes.
I just wanted to inquire thoughts about scheduling. It's my understanding from the state, and it's only told to them, but they're talking about being up maybe sometime tomorrow morning. Is that a correct assessment? I don't want to speak for you all.
Excuse me.
Tomorrow sometime we have Agent Coran to finish up with. That will take some time. SBI agent, CCBI agent that does a footwear comparison, and then the medical examiner. So,
and another agent. Yeah.
Correct.
But
and
that will be very brief.
Fingerprint analysis. So sometime tomorrow.
All right. And not to commit what we would do, but assuming that if we did not present evidence or had a very short presentation, just trying to figure out in terms of charge conferences and closings, and I know that Friday, partly because it is a half day, and so I normally have in the past, I know that that day has been set out for closing arguments because nobody wants to have a situation where we do some of the closings one day and some of the closings the other day. At least that's been my experience in the past. So I just sort of want to get some sort of forecast.
Do either of you anticipate closings will be longer than 2 hours?
Individually as together, I don't anticipate. I mean, we would probably both be giving closings. I don't think so. Of course, we know that there is no limit to how long we can do it in the capital case, but I don't. That's normally my practice is not to argue as long as an hour. What do you believe?
As of right now, we're planning to do one, and it would be less than 2 hours.
Right. So my thoughts in the scenario where there was no evidence for the defense or little, very short evidence, was that we might devote the late afternoon tomorrow to a charge conference. The charge at this phase is not particularly complex. It's something fairly well settled law on most issues. So, and I should have a draft of those instructions for you early on during the day tomorrow. So certainly over the lunch recess, you'd have them to review. So my optimistic view is that perhaps we would get to closings Friday morning. Maybe even start at 9 o'clock or something to give us a bit more time in the morning, and then just go till 1 o'clock if we could fit both closings in during that time, then recess for the weekend, and on Monday morning do the charge and begin deliberations. That's the optimistic view, but I agree, I don't want to either split up. I prefer not to either require counsel to interrupt their closing, and I would also prefer not to have one side go first, take a weekend, and then have the other side go. So that's how I'm thinking right now, that if we can't get to the closings first thing Friday morning, it may be that we just postpone both of them until Monday morning.
Is there a scheduled conflict Friday afternoon?
There is. First of all, I've already told the jury that they should plan on that. And secondly, I do have a civil matter that I have scheduled, but I've made it clear and it's a matter that is of some importance. And so I've told those lawyers that it's subject to any developments in this case, but I am trying to, for both those reasons, having committed to the jury and to you all that we would not hold court after 1 o'clock.
I just couldn't remember if someone had a scheduled conflict.
That's
fine. That's fine.
It's not written in stone, but I do have plans to hold that hearing at 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon.
That's fine. I just couldn't remember if there wasn't a scheduled conflict, we would be fine with going on until Friday afternoon.
Your Honor, I have a draft of the proposal for Agent RM, and that's shared with the defense. I think given the concerns I highlighted in my initial motion, I would ask Your Honor to consider not allowing cameras to
broadcast her testimony and to refrain from mentioning her by name in any future broadcast. And I don't think there's any objection.
All right. The one question I did have for you would be, what explanation, if any, should I give to the jury about the use of her initials?
If there's no cameras, I think that we can refer to her by name and that will be fine.
Okay. And then if that's...
That won't be complicated.
All right. All right. So I think that would be the least complicated way of doing this. This is not a courtroom closure, but it is a request or an order to the media not to broadcast this portion of the direct or cross-examination for the witness known as RM. You'll just let us know.
Yes, sir.
You'll let...
And your is not a terribly critical witness. I mean, I think the fact that all that work was done is important, but we'll also have to make sure everyone's clear on what, because her name can't be said in closings either, because closings will be broadcast. So, I mean, I don't think that that'll be a big deal, but that would be the only thing about handling it in that way instead of initials, which I still think makes the most sense.
And I think we can refer to her as the latent examiner.
Yeah.
If that sounds like a simple solution. Yeah, I'd prefer not to have to explain to the jury that why a pseudonym's being used, but if we have to, we can probably come up with something that would be a reasonable explanation. All right. Very good. Let's bring jurors then.
Entirety and where we put placards.
And so you had described that it wasn't to scale, but would it help to illustrate, one, the layout of the leasing office, and two, the areas in which you collected evidence and found certain things?
Yes.
And there are already what looks like some numbers and letters contained within 282. Just generally speaking, what are those?
Those are placards. It's a lot of footwear, and then there's some other items of evidence that were collected.
And would the use of 282 help to illustrate where those placards were and other items that you either collected or found in connection with your examination of the downstairs apartment?
Yes, it would.
Here at this time, the state would move to introduce states 282 into evidence.
Any objection? It's allowed for illustrative purposes.
Your Honor, I've also asked permission to publish it behind Agent Foran on the easel so that she can use it during the course of her testimony.
Yes, ma'am.
So right before lunch, we were talking about some items that you collected outside of the apartment. I would like to publish now the images that you talked about, which are States Exhibits 265 through 268 via the projector, so you can show the jury what you found. Agent, may she stand, Judge?
Yes.
If you could stand up and show us, you had said that there was placard 5. Why do you document it there also in a photo?
This is the point of entry window I referred to earlier, and I put a placard 5 there because that is where we were talking about found the suspected blood in the window. So 5 marks the area in the window where that was found.
And skipping ahead to 266, you had said you also put a scale. Can you show us on 266?
Yes, there is the suspected area, and there's a scale right there beside it.
And Agent Foran, do you have that marked on your sketch 282, that area?
The area, yes, it doesn't have a number 5, but the window itself is marked.
Could you, for example, use this red pen and mark with a red 5 where you collected that sample? Sure, as long as the jury can see it.
Okay. It is this window right here. So
if you just put a 5 there.
Right there.
And then skipping to 277, or 67, excuse me. And you said that's on that very same window?
It is.
268. And again, is that the area that you, where the scale is?
Yes, it is.
And if you could you mark 6 where you place placard 6 on your sketch? Now, if I could ask you to return to your seat, I'm going to show you what have been marked as CCBI exhibit item 5 and item 6. Do you recognize these? They've already been marked as States Exhibit 31 and 32. Detective Morris had indicated that he took some samples fairly shortly after this crime scene was processed. Do you recognize these 2 items?
I do.
And what are States Exhibits 31 and 32?
They are swabs of the areas indicated by markers 5 and 6, the areas of suspected blood.
So actually what you collected from these photographs and from that area?
That's correct.
If you could, looking at States Exhibit 31, does it appear that there's been further testing done on this item?
There has, yes.
And are you familiar with the process by which agents with the SBI or the crime lab mark when they do further analysis?
They have their own marks on there and their barcodes that they use with the crime lab numbers.
If you could open States Exhibit 31, your item 5.
Use my knife instead.
I'll mark what you got inside as 32A. What is 32A?
It is one of the swabs of suspected blood.
And once you collect that, can you describe what you do? That is the process by which you collect it. Can you turn back 2 slides, or just 1 slide? Back 2, back, yeah, to 266. How do you go about collecting States Exhibit 5?
Well, when we first noticed it, to test to see if it is blood, we use phenolphthalein, which is a presumptive blood test that we can use on scene. And once we get results back from that, if it's positive, then we'll use a second sterile swab, which I just showed you. And in the case of it's dried, which in this case it was, we'd use distilled water, wet in the tip of the cotton applicator, and then swab the area indicated up there with the scale, place the cap back on it, and then place it in this envelope and seal the envelope.
And is that what you did in this?
That is, and then I mark it with my initials and the date.
And then States Exhibit 32, if you could open that. Around the item itself, I'll mark 32A. What is States Exhibit 32?
The swab of suspected blood from the area indicated by placard 6.
You turn to 268, please. And is that area right there?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you collect it in the same fashion?
The
that you
same
did
way,
then?
yes, ma'am.
And again, both of these, does it look like they were sent off for submission at the SBI?
It does.
And does it look consistent with what you understand the SBI testing and their marking?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibits 31 and 32 and their contents.
Any objection? They're allowed.
Next, I'll show you another set of photographs. Set of photographs. First, State's Exhibit 269, 270, 271, and ask if you recognize those items.
Yes.
And what are the photographs of State's Exhibit 269 through 271?
They're photos of the railing of the porch of the leasing office.
And looking at it, if you're looking at it, is that the left or the right?
It's the left-hand side.
And is that how you refer to left and right, so I make sure to keep it
Right,
straight?
if it's looking onward.
Okay, looking onward. And do you see in those railings any markings or placards that you yourself had put?
Yes.
And what are those?
Placard number 7, which I used to indicate another area of suspected blood.
And then on this last one, what is the N signify?
I believe it's a footwear impression.
And you had said and so these first three, do they fairly and accurately represent the way the rail looked prior to doing any processing?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Or is that
this
what I-
one's afterwards,
Okay,
but
afterwards.
these two, yes.
So 269 and 270, would they illustrate how it looked prior to processing?
Yes, ma'am.
Looking at 271, 272, is that after processing?
Yes, ma'am.
And would they help to illustrate the various stages in which you found that left-hand porch railing?
That's true, yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would move to introduce 269, 270, 271, and 272 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? They are allowed.
The next set, 273, 274, and 275. Do you recognize those?
Yes.
And what are these three photographs?
This is placard number N, the suspected footwear impression on the railing.
And in this one, have you done any processing first?
No.
Okay. And there appears to be some sort of object in them in addition to the N. What is that?
Yes, ma'am. That's a scale.
And why do you pull out, for example, a scale when you're looking at this portion of the rail?
Later, if something is want to be compared, you need to have a scale in the photograph so that later on, whatever you're comparing it to, there's a reference point.
And are these photographs that you yourself took?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you distort them or enhance them in any way?
I did not.
Okay. And looking at State's Exhibit 273, 274, 275, are these the accurate measurements of that footwear impression to scale?
Yes.
You know, this time the state would offer to move in 273, 274, and 275 for substantive purposes.
Any objection? They are allowed.
I'm going to show you what I'm going to mark as State's Exhibit 276 and ask if you recognize this item.
Yes.
And what is 276?
I believe it's the footwear impression from the rail, but it's a gel lift of it.
Okay. And what do you mean by a gel lift?
It's a way that we collect evidence. Sometimes we can use tape. There's different kinds of lifters, and we refer to a gel lifter because that's the substance that is on the actual lift.
Before we talk about the contents of 276, Your Honor, I'd ask permission to publish 269 through 275 first.
Yes.
Now, looking at 269, Agent Horn, if you need to stand, that marker 7, again, what was that to signify?
An area of suspected blood.
And 270? Is that, can you see the area that you were
Yes.
suspecting if you could point that to the jury?
Yeah, it was this area right here.
And then 271? Show us what we're looking at there.
This is if you're standing in the patio looking outward, so the area of suspected blood would be on that side of the placard, and then N is the showing where the footwear impression was, and it would be right there on top of the railing.
And you said at this point you may have processed some of the scene. What do you mean by
Yes.
that?
So what we will use sometimes for blood to enhance it is a dye stain. It's called Amido Black, and I use that in this case.
And 272. You had said earlier that you suspected that was a blood stain. What, if anything, have you done in this photograph?
Well, beforehand, I tested it also using phenolphthalein and also took a swab of that, as I did with 5 and 6. Then with the Amido Black, that's what's happened at this point. That's why you see that bluish color. That's the dye stain.
And why do you want to use the dye stain after you've tested what you believe presumptively to be blood?
Oh, in this case, it was so light, we just wanted to see if there was anything else that may have dried that we weren't picking up with the human eye, because the dye stain will still dye it even if you can't see it.
Okay. So if there had been some that you maybe even more faint, you wanted
Right.
to try and catch it.
Yes, ma'am.
Going to 273. Again, show us what we're looking at here.
This is the footwear impression right there, and then that's the scale that we were speaking about earlier.
And if you want to remain standing, 274. Again, is this, you're trying to use the ruler to measure?
Yes.
Or to give a scale?
To give a scale for point of reference for later.
And at this point, looking at 274, have you done anything to enhance that shoe impression, or was that something that was visible to you immediately?
I believe that was visible.
Okay. And then 275, is that just another photograph of it?
Yes.
Now turning your attention back to here, Agent Foreign, 276, if you could open that item. I'm gonna mark
Do you
that
want
as,
the back?
yeah, 276A. And do you recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
This is the gel lift from placard number N that's still up on the screen.
And can you describe how it is that you go about the gel lift itself? Earlier, Agent Gold had talked about the process to get a fingerprint, that is, taking whatever powder, placing a tape down, and then putting on a card. What's different about the gel lift?
It's done the same way, because actually it was visible, and we took photos visible to the naked eye first. Then powder was applied to it to try to enhance it before I lifted it, and that's the same way it's done with the latent fingerprint as what I did with this footwear impression.
Okay, and then what do you do once you've applied the gel and used the gel lift?
Then I put this cover, there's a plastic protective cover on it. I placed that back on it, and then I put it in the envelope, or in this case, this bag, to be sealed.
And looking at that, does that appear to be the exact lift that you took on that day?
It does.
And are there different components to it?
To the piece itself, the
Yes.
gel lifter. This is an added piece here
Okay.
that is not from me,
Okay.
but
So tell us what portion you collected.
this portion right here.
I'm gonna mark, and I think we marked the back of that as 276A. I'll mark that 276B. Is that I don't know, flap? Is that another piece of plastic?
Yes,
Is that what you
like
call it?
transparency.
Okay. I'll mark the transparency as 276B. And you said that's not something you yourself did.
No, that's something I believe that examiners do later on.
And were you aware at some point that footwear comparisons were requested in this case?
Yes.
And so at this point, State's Exhibit 276 containing 276A, that's the actual lift that you did.
Yes,
And then B was something that was put on at a later date.
that's correct.
At this time, the state would move to introduce 276 containing 276A and B.
Any objection? It's allowed.
Well, and actually, I asked Your Honor that Agent Fran be able to publish it to the jury by walking down.
That's fine.
And if you could perhaps lift up the flap and show first what you did, and then walking back, show them the other.
And I would object to the flap, because that hasn't been explained yet. But I don't object to them seeing the lift at this time.
All right.
Thank you.
The objection's overruled.
Okay, well then if you could show it now.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
were
no.
you objecting to the admission or the publication of it?
I was only objecting to the publication of the component that she was not responsible for.
That's fine. I'll sustain,
Okay.
in my discretion, I'll ask that be published at some other time.
Yes, sir. Staying with this area, Agent Foran, I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as States Exhibit 33 and ask if you recognize that.
Yes.
And what is States Exhibit 33?
This is when I spoke about collecting a swab from the area of placard 7 of suspected blood. This is the swab from that area.
272. And is that from that area?
Yes, prior to the dye
Okay,
staining.
so you would have taken it before putting on the dye stain?
That's correct.
And if you could open States Exhibit 33. I'm going to mark that with 33A. Does that swab, States Exhibit 33A, either looking at it or looking at its contents, appear to also have been analyzed by the crime lab?
It does.
And other than it being analyzed, is that the swab that you took on that day?
It appears to be.
Your Honor, at this time the state would move to introduce 33 containing 33A.
Any objection? That's allowed.
At the next set of items, Agent Foran. I'm going to show you some more photographs, starting with 277.
Yeah.
That's right. 278. Let me move some inside of your way. 277, 78, 79, and 80, and ask if you recognize these items.
I do.
And what are those?
This is the right side of the railing of the same patio. 8 indicates another area of suspected blood.
And then on this on States Exhibits 279 and 80, there is is that an O versus a 0?
Right, that's a
Okay.
0. I mean, that's an O, yes.
And what does that O signify?
When we enhanced the area of the blood that we saw at 8, using the same dye stain as I spoke earlier about, sometimes it'll stain something you don't see first. That's what happened in this case. So we saw an unknown fabric impression perhaps, and that's what we're photographing there.
And so, to be clear, States Exhibits 277 and 78, is that prior to any processing being done?
Yes, ma'am.
States Exhibit 277 itself, does that illustrate the way the right-hand side railing looked to you on that day?
Yes.
And then States Exhibit 278, does that illustrate the way your suspected blood sample appeared that day?
Yes.
And then these two, States Exhibit 279 and 80, does it appear that some processing, like you said, you found something you originally had not seen?
That's correct.
But would they also illustrate how that area looked after processing?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time the state would move for illustrative purposes 277 through 280.
Any objection? They are allowed.
And then States Exhibit 281, ask if you recognize that.
Yes.
And what is 281?
I believe this is the from placard O that we just spoke about.
Yeah.
It's a suspected fabric impression is what we marked it.
And if you could open up States Exhibit 281. And now looking at that, does that appear to be the fabric impression you collected here in States Exhibit 280?
It does.
And does it appear that any other testing at all had been done on 281A?
It does not.
At this time, the state would move to introduce 281 and 281A,
Any objection?
and would ask permission to publish states exhibits 277 through 280.
That's allowed.
Agent Foreign, before I ask you to illustrate 277, early when you were testifying about the location of the suspected blood swab in 7, could you first mark that on your sketch up above?
Sure.
And then-
I think it's over there.
Okay. You need to turn it around.
Yeah.
And then, now while you're still up, if you could mark where A you collected. Thank you.
In and O up here.
If you want to put O and N, that would be great. And looking at State's Exhibit 277, is that again the area where you collected or you noticed what you believe to be suspected bloods?
Yes.
State's Exhibit 278, is that a closer up?
It is with the scale.
Oh, it actually has a scale on it, okay. And then 279, tell the jury what they're looking at there and what you may have done.
This is after the immunoblack dye stain I spoke about earlier that we did on the left side railing. This is after it's done to enhance the blood at 8, and then that's when we found this that we labeled with the O.
And prior to, and then the last slide, 280.
And that's the close-up of the fabric impression or impression that we developed with the dye stain.
The one that's here in 281.
Yes.
And you could return to your seat. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 34, previously identified by Detective Morse, and ask if you recognize that.
Yes.
And what is State's Exhibit 34?
It's going to be the suspected swab of blood from the placard 8 on the right side of the rail.
And if you could, we have a chance to open it.
Sure.
Marking it now at 34A. Is that the swab that you collected there from 8 or the right handrail?
It appears to be.
And does it also appear to have been processed at the crime lab?
It does.
At this time, the state would move to introduce 34 and 34A.
Any objection? They are allowed.
I'm going to take you now inside of the downstairs. Showing you. You had indicated that you saw in the sketch you have there that the letters, what do the letters correspond to?
Oh, to N and O. N is the footwear impression, and O is the fabric impression.
But I'm sorry, inside of the apartment, inside of your sketch there, there's A through.
Oh, it's a variety. It's footwear. If it's alphabetical, then it's footwear, and then also the numerical are items of evidence.
I'm going to show you a series of photographs now. When you say that you found footwear, suspected footwear impressions, what do you do to try and document them, or tell us how you go about that?
Well, in this case, since it was in carpet, we were trying to just document the best we could through photographs.
And is carpet an ideal situation for you?
It's not at all. It's actually unusual. It was such new carpet, and it had been vacuumed recently, it appeared, so you could tell where, if anyone walked in it, the impressions were there.
I'm going to show you first 4 photographs, 283, 284, 285, and 286, and ask if you recognize those 4 photographs.
Yes, I do.
And what are those 4 photographs?
The first photograph that has the placard A in it, that's inside the office. The second one with the most of the placards, and the third one, they're from the living room. And then the last photo is from the spare bedroom.
And do these photographs fairly and accurately represent the way those areas, and specifically where you marked certain items, looked in your analysis?
Yes.
Or to help to illustrate that to the jury?
Yes.
You're at this time that the state would move to introduce 283 through 280.
Any objection?
283 to 286?
Yes.
They are
And
allowed.
would ask that they be published to the jury.
Yes, ma'am.
Looking at 283, there seems to be an A. Could you show us again what room we're in and where on your sketch that would be located?
Okay, this is in the office, which is over here, and these are the two chairs that you see here with the placard A in between. So A would be right here by the chairs.
And 284. There's a lot going on there.
That's the living room. If you're standing over here by the kitchen, that's the kitchen island right there, and here's the living room. So this is our entertainment or TV stand that you see right there. And then you have your two tables that you see in the center of the photo, and all these letters are indicating the different placards.
And going to 285, it's kind of tight up there, sorry.
Same thing in the living room. It's just instead of standing over here, I've moved more so over here.
And 286. What room is this?
This is the spare room, which is over here, and this is standing. It's standing in the doorway, so standing right here.
And so you not only take photographs of them, but you put them on your sketch to note the location as well.
Correct.
Do you do anything else to try to document them? Well, let me ask that in another question, so I can show you a couple more. Do you know what State's Exhibit 287 is?
Yes.
And what's that?
That's a photo of just when you're walking into the front door of the apartment.
And do you know what the placard here for 9 is?
Let me just check in my notes.
I've gone from letters to numbers.
9 is an orange and colored dirt.
Okay, and so that's what you were trying to show in 9.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Coming back now to 288, I'll mark. Again, is this back in the living room?
Yes, it is.
And then you had talked about putting the placard to mark an area that you thought was suspected. What do you do to further try to document a suspected shoe wear impression that may be in carpet?
So we photographed the same like I did with my overall. You have the overall, mid-range, and close-up. So I would do the overall room and then a mid-range just showing the orientation of the placard I was about to center on within the room. And then you move on to do a close-up of that. And with footwear and carpet, with footwear you always put a scale down and you want to try to be perpendicular to the floor, have the frame of the lens of the camera perpendicular with the floor where the footwear is. And then you have the scale with it. And then with the way carpet is, you have the different shapes, you know, when you step on the floor, how you make your indentations. So I would use different forms of oblique lighting, so just using an external flash, like even just a flashlight, you know, when you show it, you get different shadows that are cast on areas. So that's what I did with the footwear in this case.
So showing you from going from 288 to 289, this has an E in it.
Yes.
Is this when you're trying to get more focused on a particular shoe?
That's right.
And I've marked this as 289. I'm going to mark these next several. 290. 291. 292. 293, 294, 295, and 96. And ask if you recognize 290 through 296.
Yes. Yes.
And what are those? That's 290 through 296.
They appear to be the footwear impression beside placard E, but with the different oblique lighting and using the scale.
Is it unusual to take 5, 6, 7 photographs in different lights to try and capture what you're seeing?
Oh, no, no. And it's, at this scene, too, it was in the living room by the sliding glass door, and it was going afternoon to evening, so the lighting in the room itself kept changing, so there was multiple photos taken.
And so State's Exhibit 289, that fairly and accurately represents the way, at least the image looked to you, not to scale. Is that safe to say?
Yes.
And then the ones here in 290 through 296, have you made an effort to document those to scale?
Yes, I did.
And is that important for later on potential comparison?
Yes.
And so looking at States Exhibit 290 through 296, do they all have your scale in them in the various shades of light?
Yes.
At this time, the state would move to introduce 289 for illustrative purposes and 290 through 296 for substantive purposes. Just quickly, you took all of these photographs?
Yes, I took
For
photos.
substantive purposes.
Any objection? All right, and I'm sorry, you said 289 for
Illustrative. Wait,
289 for substantive? Or do I have that back?
289 for illustrative purposes.
Sorry, I have it backwards.
290 through 296.
For substantive, all right, and no objection, Ms. D? All right, thank you. Allowed.
Can you show 288? Your Honor, if I did not, I also would move to introduce States Exhibit 287 and 288.
Any objection?
Those were the overalls. Looking at 288 here, Agent Ferran, can you tell us what we're looking at there?
Yes, you're in the living room, and I'm standing about right here, so it's just an overall of the different areas I'm trying to make stand out of footwear impressions.
And is this a little bit closer than the one you were further back on the wall? Or are you
Yes.
focusing on E now?
Yeah, this is right before I go to focus in on E.
And going to the next photograph. Is that E there? Can you show us just generally speaking what you saw or what you were trying to document?
So, placard E right here, and our footwear impression is in this area right here.
Your Honor, I don't know if I asked to publish 289 through 296.
That's
but-
fine, go ahead.
And then we're going to walk through 290 through 296 and tell us generally speaking what you're trying to do. Here's 290.
So here's the scale, and then you can see more of the actual outline of the footwear impression. And I've got light coming in from this way, just trying to hit different shadows.
And then 291.
And it's just the same thing. I'm just moving the lighting around, trying to capture different areas of the impression.
92. Same thing.
Same thing, just coming from a different area.
And 93.
Same thing again.
94. 95. And 96. And is that all of E, or the shoe impression initially that you documented in E?
I believe so.
Okay. And in the various different ones on carpet, did you do the same thing, for example, with A, with B, with C, to the best that you could?
I did.
Okay. And have you had occasion to see what I'm now marking as States Exhibit 297, a disc containing approximately 148 photographs this morning?
Yes, ma'am.
And do those contain all of the photographs that you took in the downstairs apartment on the carpet and on hardwood?
Yes, I believe.
And again, would you take general, like we did in 289, the overall photograph of each placard?
Yes.
The subsequent photos for each of the, for subsequent photos of each of them, would you then put to scale and use the various lighting techniques?
I would. It would get. I'd do the overall, and then say I was coming to placard D, so I would do D, and then after D comes E in the alphabet. It was all done alphabetically. So.
And all of States 297, does that contain your footwear, or at least your suspected footwear impression photograph?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would move to introduce States Exhibit 297 containing 148 photographs.
Any objection? All right, that is allowed as well.
The next set of photographs are 298. And I would ask if you recognize $298, $299, $210, $300, sorry, and $301.
Yes.
And what are those photographs?
These.
Starting over here with 298.
It's placard P is what I'm about to focus in on, which was a footwear impression on the hardwood when you walked in.
And going from 298 to 299?
99 is just going to be the mid-range photograph of placard P.
And then 300.
Is the close-up with the scale of the footwear impression.
And then what is State's Exhibit 301?
It's showing the relationship between placard P and placard Q in the kitchen area, which both were indicating different areas of footwear.
Here's Q. Sorry. And looking at State's Exhibits 289 through 301, do they fairly and accurately represent sort of the hardwood and foyer area looked and your ability to try and document what you saw in there?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time the state would move to introduce 289 through 301 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection?
Yes. 289. I'm sorry. Can I? Mouth is right. 298 through 301. And would ask to publish those photographs.
Yes.
Looking here at 289, you had said that you were getting ready to focus on P.
Yes.
And going now to 291. Can you show the area that you were trying to document?
Yes, so placard P in the area right here.
You had said earlier that carpet is not ideal in terms of trying to capture an image. What about sort of, I don't know if it's hardwood or if it's real wood, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know?
No,
Okay.
but this surface is much more useful.
Okay. And then going to 300. Is that to scale there?
Yes, that's the close-up of placard P.
And then 301. Show us where Q is in there.
Here's P and then Q is right over there.
I'm going to show you what I'm marking as 302 and ask if you recognize that.
Yes.
And what is 302?
I processed the floor with volcanic powder for any kind of latent evidence, and I was able to develop a suspected footwear impression at the letter Q that was just shown, and this is a gel lift of that.
Were you able to do that with P?
No, with P I was not able to collect.
And then looking if you could open State's Exhibit 302.
Oops, take your sticker.
And I'll mark the back of that as 302A. You have some writing on the back of 302. Why do you do that, or what's the purpose for that?
Just in case if it were ever to become separated from its packaging. This also has all of the same information that's on the evidence labels that I described earlier. So it's my name, what item this is, what case it's from, just where it came from.
And similar to the way you described lifting the imprint on the railing on the exterior, is that the same method you used to try and lift this?
Yes, it is.
But you said that you had put powder down first.
I did. I put volcanic powder down first.
And does that appear to be in the same condition as when you last lifted it?
It does.
And the other one had, perhaps in addition, does this one appear to have one?
It does not.
Your Honor, this time the state would move to introduce 302 containing 302A.
Any objection?
I
Allowed.
would ask if Agent Ferem be allowed to publish that by walking down.
Yes.
State's Exhibit 303, 304, and 305, and ask if you recognize those three.
Yes.
And what are those three photographs?
So this is the right side of the patio, the upper portion of the patio, so above the placard 8 and the O. This is the upper portion of that patio.
And what were you
side.
trying to do in these photographs, or what did they help to show that you were doing?
We were just processing for any kind of latent evidence on that wood part right above. This is actually the apartment where the deceased was found. That's the base of her patio.
And States Exhibits 303 through 305, do they illustrate the way that, I guess sort of the floor separating the downstairs and the upstairs
Yes.
patio?
Mm-hmm.
You're on the state would move to introduce 303 through 305 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? Allowed.
306, 307, 308, 309, 310, and 311. Do they all appear to be photographs of that general area you were trying to document?
They do.
Okay. And why were you taking so many of these and in this area?
Well, had trouble reaching that area. I actually had to climb up on a ladder. And so I was just trying to get the best forms possible. And then again, with the light playing on it too, there was a little bit of shadow there. So I just took as many as possible.
And so in this, there's also a scale where you're trying to document sort of the scale to which you found. What did you believe this to be, or did you have an opinion about it?
Just an unknown impression. We really did not know.
And again, there's several photographs of the same thing, just as best as you could on that ladder.
Yes, ma'am.
You're on this time the state would move to introduce 306 through 311 at this time, just for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? Allowed.
And would ask permission to publish this last set, that is 303 through 311.
Yes.
Looking now at 303, you had said that this is the area in between. Can you show us where the leasing office is and where Melissa's apartment was?
This is the leasing office right here. So right below this is the railing that had the placard 8 and O on it. So looking straight up, then this is the base of the deceased apartment. And that's the railing to her patio.
And were you aware at some point that someone from your agency collected the dryer event that's there depicted?
Yes.
Okay. And can you show us where that is in this photograph?
I believe it was right in this area.
Okay.
There's a little gray box.
And then 303, I'm sorry, 304, and then 305. So just getting closer.
It is. We're focusing on this area right here.
And then 306, 07, 08, 9, 10, 11. Are those all just photographs trying to document that? And were you able to lift anything or determine anything from that, or you're just trying to document
We're just trying to document it. We did lift it as well. Yeah.
A couple more photographs. Three 12. 311. 313. Going backwards now.
I'm not helping either.
314. 315. And 316. Start off with these first couple. 312. 313 and 314. Ask if you recognize those.
Yes.
And what is this area showing, or were these photographs of?
This is the interior in the living room, the sliding glass door and screen door.
And we had talked about, you had said earlier that the door was ajar when you got there. Did you mean the screen, the sliding, or both?
I should correct, the screen door was still open, the sliding glass door was closed.
And in this point, is the screen door open or shut?
I believe it's still open.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at this, what were you trying to look for or document on these particular photographs?
I'd processed it with a magnetic powder, magnetic and volcanic, I believe, but just looking for latent evidence, fingerprints of any kind, and found a fabric impression.
And I'll turn you now to 315 and 316. What are those photographs documenting?
It's a close-up of the suspected fabric impression with the scale.
And will these help to illustrate the way that sliding glass door looked? And is this on the inside of the sliding glass door or the outside?
This is the inside.
Okay, the
It's inside.
interior.
Yes, because you can see the porch railing from there.
Here at this time, the state would move to introduce state's exhibits 312 through 316 at this time.
Any objection? Allowed?
And would ask permission to publish these.
Yes, ma'am.
Looking at 312, again, you're saying you're looking out towards the balcony, or the patio, I guess, because we're on the
Right.
first floor. And state's exhibit 313. Have you processed it? Show us what areas you were processing, if you would.
This area right here is where it was a suspected fabric impression.
And then 314? Is that just in a different light?
Yeah, it's just a different, I kind of just brought it around a little bit more.
And then 315?
And that's the same photos, but just with the scale this time, so we're looking in this area.
And then 316?
Yeah, the same thing, just right here in that area.
And I'm going to show you here 317 and ask if you recognize your item 29, but it's
Yes.
317. And what is that?
I lifted this suspected fabric impression, and that's what's in here.
If you could open that up. Mark the back of that is 317A. And ask, is that the actual lift of the fabric impression that you did?
Yes.
And does it appear to be processed again in any other way?
No.
And does it appear to be in the same condition as when you lifted it?
It does.
Your Honor, this time the state would move to introduce 317 containing 317A.
Any objection? Allowed?
And Agent Fran, when you collect a latent impression, or, you can collect what you believe to be a fabric impression, why do you collect unknown fabric impressions?
When you don't know any portion of the case, or even when you do, and they can actually be compared to things later on. There's different characteristics. It's not my specialty by any means. I'm just all about collecting it. But there could be evidentiary value in this later. So that's the reason we collect it.
And the photographs and the items that you have seen here, other than that overlay that you said that you did not do, was that all done there at the scene?
It was. Mhm.
Show you a couple other items that you collected at the scene. I'm going to show you 318 and 319 and ask if you recognize those.
Yes.
And what are 318 and 319?
They are cutouts of the carpet of some of the footwear impressions.
And specifically marking this first one as 318, do you know where this one was taken from?
It says letter M.
And can you show us on your sketch where that would have been?
That's right here in the spare bedroom.
Why would you take a cutting from the carpet rather than photograph it?
Well, it was just an addition too. You just try to collect as much as you can.
And does it appear to be that there was any additional processing done on that?
I don't believe so.
Here at this time, the state would move to introduce 318.
Any objection? It's allowed.
And 319, where was this particular piece of carpet cut out?
It indicates letter F, so that would be here in the middle of the living room.
And again, does it appear to have any further processing?
No.
Here at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 319.
Any objection? It's allowed.
320, if you could tell us what 320 is.
Inside of, when you walked into the front door, there was a, may I show on here? Right here, there's a little side table. This is the door right here, and on the side table, there were keys and then key paper. You know, sometimes with new keys, they'll attach like a paper that's in the shape of the key when you first buy it. That's what I'm referring to by key paper. They were strewn on this table right here. And I was instructed that the drawer that you showed earlier that was open in the kitchen, that those keys were moved from that drawer to that table. So inside of this are the keys and the key paper off of that table that's from the drawer.
And were they on so the key was on its card itself, or were they separated?
Some of them, it was a mixture.
And you took all the keys and the papers into your possession?
Yes, ma'am.
And State's Exhibit 321, what is that?
It's an iPad box and case.
And if you could open up State's Exhibit 321. I'm going to mark the first thing that you have in your hand is 321A, and then 321B, or 322B and 321A and 321B. Speak specifically 321A, what is that?
It's an iPad box.
And then 321B.
Is the iPad case.
And did you collect those items there at the scene?
I did.
And those appear to have been processed, is that correct?
Yes.
And where would you have done that?
At the lab, at our lab.
And what were you looking for specifically on 321A and B?
Latent evidence.
And were you able to collect some potential latent fingerprints from either of those items?
Yes, I was.
You could stick those back in there. After processing them, after you processing them, was anything else done?
I know, I believe I collected contact DNA.
Contact DNA?
I did. Oh, sorry. I believe I collected contact DNA from that as well.
Your Honor, at this time I would move to introduce State's Exhibit 320, 321A, and B inside of 321.
Any objection? They're allowed.
Your Honor, I'd ask permission to publish State's Exhibit 258 that's already in evidence.
Yes.
Agent Fran, can you tell us where the keys were, where you located them?
Yes, this is the side table right here, and they're over here.
You said that you had collected some contact DNA, I'm sorry, if you want to return to your seat, some contact DNA, you believe, from the iPad box itself. Did you try and collect contact or touch DNA from any other items?
Yes, the screens, and I believe I did from the keys as well. I'd have to check my notes, though.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'll start marking these as State's Exhibit 322.
Yes.
And what is 322?
It's a fabric impression.
And is that the one that you tried to lift from where was that one taken from?
I'm gonna have to check my notes. It was taken from item 2, which was one of the window screens.
Okay. And then State's Exhibit 323, ask if you recognize that.
Yes.
And what is that?
That's another fabric impression that was taken from the other window screen.
Do either of these appear to have been processed in any other way?
No.
At this time, the state would move to introduce 323 and 322.
Any objection? They are allowed.
I'm going to take you now to 324, right here, your item 17.
Possible contact DNA swab from the interior of window 3 blinds.
Similarly, looking at State's Exhibit 325, what is that?
The same thing, another possible contact DNA swab from the blinds of window 3.
And would you have taken them from the same portion, or why do you have two different possible contact DNA swabs from line number 3?
We were just trying to get into different areas, and it was also where we lifted some latent prints, so we swabbed over there.
If you could, you said blind from window 3. Which window is window 3 using your sketch?
It's also the window with 5 and 6, the point of entry window.
If you could maybe with this Sharpie and a circle, so we don't get confused with your other numbers, mark window number 3 with a 3 and a circle. And where would window 1 be, for example?
This is 1.
Can you mark them each with a number and a circle? And then 2. Okay. And so states exhibits 324 and 325, those are the actual DNA swabs that you took from window 3.
Yes,
And again, do these appear to have been further analyzed?
they do.
Your Honor, this time the state would move to introduce states exhibits 324 and 325 as contact DNA swabs from window 3.
Any objection? They are allowed.
And to be clear, where on window 3 were they taken?
The interior of the blinds.
So on the inside portion of the blind?
Yes.
And again, states exhibit 326. And where is that? What is that?
It's this same thing, a possible contact DNA swab from the interior of window 3 blinds.
To the same area?
Yes, ma'am.
Does this also appear to have been further analyzed?
It does.
States exhibit 327. Where is swab?
It is. I'd have to look and see exactly from 35. That's from window screen number 1.
Okay. And so that's the window that you've marked as 1, or was it actually
Yes.
from the screen that you collected?
It was which screen came from which window.
But you just designated 1 as 1 and 1 as 2.
Right.
States exhibit 328.
Is going to be a possible contact DNA swab from window screen number 2.
And so for each of these window screens that we've seen down here, you took a swabbing from in 327 from one and 328 from the other one.
That's correct.
And again, do these also appear to have been further analyzed?
They do.
Here at this time, the state would move to introduce 326, 327, and 328 into evidence.
Any objections? I'm sorry. No
Making
objection.
sure that we had on 329 yet.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that's correct.
Okay. Now I will show you 329 and ask if you recognize that.
Yes, that's a possible contact DNA swab from item number 4, which was a candy wrapper.
Okay. And where was that candy wrapper in connection with all we've talked about?
It was in the breezeway, next to the door, the entry door into the apartment.
And at that point, did you have any idea whether it had any connection with the case?
No, ma'am.
Does it appear to have been analyzed?
No.
States Exhibit 330, what is this?
Possible contact DNA swab from item 11, which were the keys in the paper.
And so inside of the item that we already described that you collected on scene, you took some of them out to do contacts?
Yes.
Would you have processed those for fingerprints as well?
Yes, I treated those the same as the window screens.
And do you recall whether you got any fingerprints off of, or latent lifts off of?
I can look. I don't believe I did, but I take that back. I did off of the key paper.
And then, did I ask you about 331? You're 39.
It's a possible contact DNA swab from the iPad box.
Not the case, the box.
It's the box and the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so states exhibits 330 and 331 from the keys and wrapper and then the iPad, do they appear to have been further processed?
They do.
And at this time, Your Honor, I would move to introduce states exhibit 330 and 331.
Any objection? They're allowed.
And 329 to the extent that I forgot to do that as well.
It's allowed.
Agent Foran, I have 4 quick items to show you. You had talked about processing fingerprints. In this case, do you have any idea about how many that you did?
How many lift cards,
Yes.
rather? I know it's over 100, maybe 107.
And earlier, Agent Gold had said that several lift cards may be put into one envelope. Is that safe to say?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you 332. 333, 334, 335, and 336, if you want to start looking through those and see if you recognize those.
Yes, these are the latent envelopes that contain the latent lift cards that I lifted throughout the case.
And specifically, I'm going to draw your attention first to your item 12, 332. Can you tell how many lift cards are in there?
20.
333. How many particular cards are in there?
It's 21 through 62 card numbers. It's around 40 cards.
334.
Would be card numbers 63 through 99.
So 30 some.
Yes.
335.
Is card number 100 through 107. Melissa did that.
So I'm going to show you these 4 sets, 332 through 335. In total, you had about 107 now looking at them?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you collect all of these there, either in the exterior or the interior of the leasing office?
Not all of those. This last one that contains 100 through 107 was from the lab processing.
From the iPad and the keys?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
the 2 parts of that. Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce into evidence states exhibits 332, 333, 334, and 335 as the latent lifts collected by Agent Fran.
Any objections? They're allowed.
We had talked about the fact that you had one case number and the upstairs apartment case number had a different number. What was your CCBI case number?
I believe mine was 13003158.
And all of the items that you have collected in connection with this would have had that case number?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any further questions.
Let's go ahead and take a mid-afternoon recess, and then we'll come back with cross-examination of this witness. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll resume at 4 o'clock. If you'll recall all my instructions, leave your notepads, gather in the deliberation room at 4 o'clock. Everyone else, please remain seated. Outside the presence of the jury, are there matters that we need to take up before we recess for a few minutes? Be in recess till 4 o'clock.